What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another review, and this time we're taking a look at Batman The Long Halloween Part 1. Batman The Long Halloween is heavily inspired and adapted to the screen based off the Long Halloween graphic novel by Joseph Loeb and Tim Sale, which is one of my all-time favorite Batman stories. Before I get started with the movie review, if you've not read The Long Halloween, I implore you, read it. It's a fantastic graphic novel. It takes place during the early years of Batman's career, where his detective skills are being refined, and it focuses heavily on the relationship between himself, Gordon, and Harvey Dent. Not only that, it's just a really good, enthralling detective story that really goes the course of a year. And a lot happens in this graphic novel, just like a lot happens in this animated movie. Though if you were to compare the graphic novel to the movie does take a lot of creative liberties with the story, but it never loses the essence of said story. I think that's an appropriate segue to talk about the first half, the first half of Long Halloween. I overall thought that the part one of the Long Halloween is a very good adaptation of the first half of the graphic novel. For the most part, it stays true to the overall spirit and tone of the story, but like I said, it does take a lot of creative liberties and it does change a lot of things around, but it doesn't do it in a way where it's unrecognizable, because you still get scenes that are lifted from the graphic novel. You get dialogue that is lifted from the graphic novel, and hearing these actors deliver these lines from the graphic novel is just a thing of beauty to your ears, especially if you're a longtime fan of the overall story itself. But if you're not familiar with the graphic of Batman The Long Halloween, I mean, the overall plot is this. Batman has to team up with Commissioner Gordon and Harvey Dent to try and track down and find this mysterious killer known as Holiday, who is killing members and associates of the Falcone crime family, and he's killing everyone on a specific holiday of each of the month. The first killing takes place on Halloween of a guy named Johnny Vitti, who is a family member of the Falcone family. Then on Thanksgiving, a character called Mark Chen is slaughtered along with his associates. And then on Christmas, and then you get to Christmas where another killing goes down, and on New Year's Eve, another killing goes down when Alberto Falcone, Carmine's son, is gunned down and chopped to bits by the Holiday killer. So, yeah, right off the bat, it's an engrossing story, and like I said, a lot of things does get changed, because in the original story, Alberto Falcone, he does not die the way he does in the movie. He's more or less a presence all throughout the original story, but I kind of like the change a little bit about Falcone, and I do like the red herring, because it does stay true to Alberto Falcone's character from the story, about how he's like pretty much the black sheep of a crime family, and but at the same time he doesn't want anything to do with said crime family. So like you do get the overall essence of Alberto's character, and by killing him off in this movie kind of makes it more interesting, and you kind of narrowing down the suspects till you get to the ultimate reveal. Now, I don't know if they're going to do the ultimate now, being that Alberto is off the board, who the ultimate reveal of Holiday is going to be very interesting when I get to part 2. Then again, if you read the actual story, the ending of the actual story of The Long Halloween kind of leaves it up to the audience's interpretation as to who truly was the Holiday killer in the overall graphic novel. In this movie, I got a feeling we're gonna find out that there's only been one Holiday killer the entire time, and when they get to that reveal, if it is who I think it is, it's going to stay true to the overall tone of the story and the overall story of the original book. But I have to wait and see. But we're not talking about 2, we're talking about 1. And like I said, as an overall adaptation of the first half of the story, I think it does a fantastic job. The cast in this movie is beautiful. Jensen Ackles plays a young Bruce Wayne Batman who is, in the early stages of his career, and it's pretty much the beginnings of Batman as a detective and not so much as a brutal crime fighter. And that's one of the things of The Long Halloween that I actually think it's right, which is Batman has to stop relying on his brutally beating criminals and has to act as a detective. And he's a pretty good detective. I mean, a lot of the clues, they do end up pointing to a lot of red herrings, and Batman does get fooled. but that's okay. No, this is the early stages of him as a detective, so he's not going to get it right away. He's going to understand the pieces, understand the clues, but they're going to become misleading, and that's pretty much what the killer wants it to do. He wants you to be misled. And I thought that Jensen Ackles, as the character, does a great job all throughout. And the voice actors who play Gordon and Harvey Dent, I thought were really great as well. The chemistry between the three characters is straight off the page, with them having to form this alliance to try and find out who this holiday killer is. Some of the best scenes in this movie is pretty much the three of them it's pretty much the three of them strategizing. Great chemistry by the cast all throughout this film. And you also have some... And you also have some good portrayals of the other characters, like Catwoman is voiced by the late Naya Rivera. I thought she was really good in the title role of Catwoman. This movie expands on the Batman-Catwoman relationship and a lot of the tension that happens between the two. But you also get scenes of them working together, as well, which I really liked too. You have Troy Baker, who's in this movie as the Joker, and more or less, the Joker is like the ultimate red herring of Part 1. Especially when he gets introduced during the Christmas section of the story. But it's ultimately revealed that Joker is not Holiday, and that Joker wants to kill Holiday because Joker doesn't want to be second to Holiday. That just further expands of Joker's obsession of wanting to be the be-all, end-all for almost everything. And as always, Troy Baker does a great job as the character of Joker. Now, I've always liked Troy Baker's Joker from ever since he did in Arkham Origins, and when he did it on Assault on Arkham, and selected other Batman properties. Like, Troy Baker is a good Joker, and he really captures the overall spirit of Mark Hamill's Joker. I enjoyed his performance immensely, and Joker is a lot of fun once he's introduced near the end of in the last half of this movie. Troy Baker's performance is a lot of fun. It maintains the spirit of what the Joker is supposed to be, this mischievous psychotic, which is just a lot of fun to watch. How this movie handles the Falcone family, I enjoyed a lot. I like Titus Welliver as Carmine Falcone. He gives the character a very distinguished presence, a very distinguished voice. He sounds like an old school, mafia guy that you can pretty much see being a principal character in the Francis Ford Coppola Godfather movies. That, to me, is how good Titus Welliver does with the voice of Carmine Falcone. Like, he gives him a sense of elegance and ruthlessness all at the same time. Very understated, very, very good performance. I like how the movie handles the character of Alberto Falcone in this film as well. I like how we get to see him being just the black sheep of the Falcone family. How he earns for his father's approval or appreciation, but never gets it. Especially during the New Year's Eve section of this movie, where Carmine's making this speech, and we, the audience, are led to believe that he's talking about Alberto, but at the end, he's talking about Bruce Wayne. And you can just see the disappointment in Carmine's eyes and expression that no matter what, he can never get his father's approval in his mind. And this is actually the motivation that Alberto does have in the original graphic novel, as he's the killer in the original story. But in this one, his character is killed off at the end of this film, which is what makes it very, very interesting as to what direction they're going to go in Part 2. But all the events leading up to it, I like how Alberto's character was handled for the most part. I enjoyed it. I think the overall animation style of this movie is actually pretty good. It's got a distinct look to it. It's not like the graphic novel, but the animation in a lot of areas does remind me of the old Batman animated series, but just has a more of a modern twist and update to it. But I like the overall animated look of this movie. It looks fantastic, very rich, very detailed. It looks like a comic book pretty much. And like I said, I thought the voice cast all throughout was fantastic, especially David Daltreyman's portrayal as Calendar Man, which comes across as just creepy and eerie, just as he was in the graphic novel. So yeah, I overall think that Part 1 is a very strong adaptation of the first half of The Long Halloween. I do not mind the creative liberties that it takes. I actually think it does the story much, much better. I like the utilization of some characters like Solomon Grundy, who is in the Gotham Sewers. He appears in the story as well as a character. The changes don't bother me. The trimming of certain scenes I thought was actually a good idea because it makes the story flow flow much better. And I like the opening title sequences of this film, where you get to see panels of the Long Halloween, and also some shots of in the movie as well, that that condense certain filler scenes that didn't need to be in the movie per se. So that stuff didn't bother me, and to me, it makes the movie have a much better flow, and we get right to the story. And I do like the added scenes of Batman having some fight scenes to break up the monotony of a detective story. You got to have some action in there to also say first and foremost, yes, this is a superhero movie, but it is also a detective movie as well. So you do get that good balance. So, yeah, overall, Batman The Long Halloween Part 1 is a solid adaptation of the first half of the story, and I am very much looking forward to seeing how Part 2 handles the rest of it. Well, until then, we'll check you back later for Part 2. So, to do a little side note on to Batman The Long Halloween Part 1, the movie also explores the relationship between Harvey and his wife Gilda. We see that they're in a good marriage, but it's a little bit strained due to Harvey constantly being away since he's the DA. And the movie also hints that Gilda may have some psychological issues wrong with her, since every scene that she's in, she's kind of played as always being down. So if it's what I think it is and how it's going to stay true to the original comic book, I'm really interested to see how the relationship between Gilda and Harvey does get explored. And there's also a fake out scene where we're soon to believe that Harvey and Gilda were killed in a house bomb, when in actuality Harvey was just injured, though not Two-Face yet. So I like how that was handled. I thought that was cool. And the post-credit scene at the end of Part 1 sets up Bruce Wayne being mind controlled by Poison Ivy, who is in cahoots with Carmine Falcone. So yeah, I like how those two situations were handled, and I like how it's going to lead into Part 2 and to where Part 2 takes the overall rest of the story. So I'll check you back later for Part 2. What's up, everyone? Let's waste no time. Let's talk about Batman The Long Halloween Part 2, the second half of the story. So pretty much Part 2 picks up where the post-credit scene of the Part 1 leaves off. Bruce Wayne is now under the influence of Poison Ivy. He signs over all his assets to Carmine Falcone. While that's going on, the Holiday Killer is still doing his or her thing by knocking off members and associates of the Falcone family. We gloss over what happens on Valentine's Day. We gloss over what happens on St. Patrick's Day, and we pick up pretty much on April Fool's Day, and that's where the movie pretty much gets going. Eventually, Selina Kyle, she comes in, she saves Bruce, and they're back on the trail of who the Holiday Killer is. For the most part, I like how Part 2 was handled as the second half of the story. I think some of the creative choices that Part 2 takes is actually pretty cool, and I like what they did with a lot of the characters. For example, I really like how they handled Scarecrow in Part 2 of this movie. Scarecrow comes across as really, really creepy and very, very intimidating, to me at least. And I really enjoyed Robert Atkin Downs' voice performance as Scarecrow. He gives it a real menacing feel. On the flip side, he's also teaming with the Mad Hatter, voiced by John DiMaggio, and I liked his performance as the Mad Hatter, talking in this exaggerated British accent while doing a lot of nursery rhyme quotes like the Wallace and the Carpenter, and obviously stuff from Alice in Wonderland. I think the team up of Scarecrow and Mad Hatter was very, very enjoyable. And if I do have a criticism, I would have liked to see more scenes with these two just bantering back and forth, because it was some pretty interesting stuff, like really interesting stuff. And the whole thing of Batman being doused with fear toxin and thinking that, and having this vision of Selina Kyle being his mother is actually pretty cool. And I enjoyed all that immensely. That was good stuff. I was not a fan of omitting Riddler from the story, because Riddler does make an appearance in the original graphic novel, but in this movie he's nowhere to be found. I wasn't too keen on that, not crazy about that. We could have squeezed in the Riddler here somewhere, but we didn't. But it's neither here nor there, I guess. But we do see Harvey's transformation into Two-Face, which I thought was really well handled. And I really like the scenes with Sal Maroni in this movie. And I like how he pretty much I like how Maroni pretty much played everyone. He goes to Dent thinking that, pretty much convincing Dent that he's going to rat out Falcone, when in actuality, Maroni is just going to go there to take down Harvey Dent, since pretty much Maroni thinks that Dent is the Holiday Killer. And that's pretty much further expanded upon with Carl Leviti the sister of Carmine Falcone, also insisting on that by going on public TV. So we get the whole courtroom scene where where Maroni douses the acid in Dent's face, and we get the revelation, and we get his Two-Face transformation. But leading up to that, we finally get to see Two-Face Harvey Dent struggle with his duality. The voice in his head telling him one thing while Dent's trying to portray another thing to the courtroom. I thought that stuff was really well handled, and credit to Josh Duhamel, who voiced Harvey Dent in both parts. He did a fantastic job in part 2, especially when he was playing Two-Face. He really channeled his inner Richard Mall, who was the original voice of Two-Face from the 90s animated cartoon. There were moments where Duhamel sounded a lot like Richard Mall's Two-Face, and to me, Richard Mall's version of Two-Face is the definitive version of that character. But Duhamel did a fantastic job at playing tribute to that performance, and we get a lot of that in the part 2 when he goes into full Two-Face. The majority of the second half of this movie is pretty much the Two-Face story and his revenge against Falcone and Maroni, to the point where he teams up with Solomon Grundy, and then he rounds up a bunch of Batman's rogue villains that appeared all throughout both films, like the Penguin, who had a minor role in the story. You blink and you're gonna miss it. Poison Ivy, who had a role in the story, but she's taken out in like the first 10 minutes of the part 2 by Selena Kyle, but she does come back at the end. Scarecrow Mad Hatter return. Solomon Grundy, who appears in both versions of the story, appears in this one pretty much as like Two-Face's henchman, and they break into Falcone's penthouse, going to kill him until he's eventually rescued by Batman and Catwoman. But in the end, the Roman does end up getting shot by Harvey Dent, and this is what brings Sofia Falcone, who appeared early in the film, who was also portrayed as a red herring as to who the holiday killer could be, but she's eventually taken out when she falls out of a building. To her alleged death. As to if they're going to keep her dead or not, I don't know, because The Long Halloween does have a sequel in Dark Victory. So if there are to do if Batman's next movie is going to be Dark Victory, you could bring her back, but who's to say? But in terms of this continuity that this movie is a part of, Sofia Falcone pretty much falls to her demise. But I do like how this movie further implicates that Selena Kyle is the illegitimate daughter of Carmine, which has always been hinted at in the comic books for like decades. So I do like that. That was pretty cool. And I do like the flashbacks in this movie too, that ties a young Carmine to a young Bruce Wayne, since it was Thomas Wayne who pretty much saved Carmine from death. So a lot of Carmine's a young Bruce Wayne kind of took to heart a lot of Carmine's principles, the good version of the kind of decent principles that he has, but Bruce just interpreted it in his own way and used it for his brand of vigilante justice. But I like that. You kind of get that sense of the Falcones and the Waynes having this unspoken family ties with one another, like a mutual respect, if you will. I like all that stuff. I thought that stuff was pretty cool, and it goes to the comics as well. So that's another thing that this movie does get absolutely right. So I enjoyed all that stuff too. Calendar Man also makes an appearance in this movie again. Once again, David Dalcherman he does a fantastic job at Calendar Man, and Calendar Man always does a good job of just doing a lot of misdirection, talking in just vagueness, to the point where because Calendar Man knows who did it, he just won't say who did it. But I think towards the end, Calendar Man's usefulness in the movie kind of goes into a little bit of jokey territory, which I wasn't a fan of, because the movie did an overall good job at adapting his Hannibal Lecter-like creepiness. Then when you get to the end of the movie, that kind of just fades away a little bit, which I wasn't a fan of. But when we get to the ultimate end of this movie, which is, once everything goes down and the big third act happens with Batman and Catwoman taking down all the rogues villains, we go to Two-Face, Batman, and Gordon atop of GCPD 1 year later after the holiday killings, or after the long Halloween is basically over. And pretty much Harvey Dent, Two-Face, is going to take full responsibility for the murders. And of course we get the old thing as like, was it worth it in the end? Was it worth it in the end? Was taking down Falcone, worth losing what we lost? To which Gordon said, yes, it was, but As to how it will affect Gotham in the long run, who's to know? And this is what further, and like these things are what take Batman and further jade him as his decades as a crime fighter go on. But we get to the real ending, in which it's revealed that Gilda Dent, Harvey Dent's wife, is the real holiday killer. And this goes back to the comics. And this goes back to the comics as well, where Alberto Falcone, he's revealed to be holiday killer in the comics, but it's also implied that Gilda also played a hand in being the holiday killer as well. And I'm of two minds at how they interpreted her motivations from both books to screen. In the book, Gilda, as the alleged holiday killer, did it as a way to underhandedly help Harvey wipe out crime in Gotham by pretty much being a serial killer to the mob. In the movie version, it's a basic revenge plot. So pretty much Gilda and Alberto went to school together. They got pregnant and wanted to get married, but Roman Falcone would never allow an illegitimate child into his family out of wedlock. So pretty much Gilda, feeling jaded, just concocts this entire plan to kill off the Falcone family, including Alberto, who she had no remorse in killing. But she also admits that she does love Harvey Dent and not Two-Face. So, like, I'm of two minds of the ending. Like, I don't hate it, but I'm just, like, on the fence about it. But overall, it does stay true to the Long Halloween's overall story and atmosphere and tone, which I do appreciate, and I do overall love this movie for. and this thing at the end of Green Arrow and Flash showing up at Bruce's doorstep, implying that there's going to be a big adventure with the Justice League, that's okay. That was fun too in its own little way. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on both parts of Batman: The Long Halloween. At the end of the day, I'm going to give this adaptation a solid 9.5 out of 10. I thought this is a fantastic version of one of my all-time favorite Batman stories. Some of the changes I thought were really well done, and other changes I wasn't that big of a fan of, but it didn't hurt the overall story. So yeah, 9.5 out of 10 for Batman: The Long Halloween. I highly recommend you watch both parts of the story. You're not going to be disappointed. So yeah, my name is AJ Legend. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.